1803, Prussia, the boy who killed his family and left a play for each murder, the Kassel Theatre Files. The year was 1803. Prussia stood still beneath a gray winter sky. Snow pressed against the streets of Kassel, muffling footsteps, burying sound. In that silence, behind one crooked row of houses, a horror was unfolding that no one in town could have imagined. At first, Kassel looked ordinary. Merchants carried bread. Soldiers polished boots for a war that might or might not come. Children threw snowballs in the alleys. Yet behind one shuttered house, the windows stayed dark for days. No smoke from the chimney. No laughter. No movement. People whispered, but no one dared to knock. Then came the smell. Sharp. Metallic. A stench the snow could not bury. Neighbors finally forced the door open, stepping into the shadows of a home that had turned into a theater of death. The family lay scattered across the rooms, each body placed deliberately as if part of a performance. Chairs overturned, candles burned to wax puddles. On the table, neat stacks of paper, each page covered with ink. Not prayers, not letters, plays. Plays that described each murder in haunting detail, written as if the killer were both the actor and the director. And the killer was only a boy. Kassel had seen tragedy before, wars, famine, disease, but never something like this. A child, barely in his teens, methodically destroying his family and turning their deaths into scripted dramas. The townspeople recoiled in disbelief. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers muttered about demons. No one could understand how a boy could hold such darkness, or why he would write it down. Some said he had been born cursed. Others whispered he was inspired by traveling theater troupes, those that wandered through Prussia, filling village halls with stories of kings and betrayals. But this was no borrowed tale. These were blood-soaked scenes, written not for applause, but for memory. The house became a shrine of fear. Authorities sealed it off, but word spread fast. People said they heard echoes from inside. The rustle of papers, the faint voice of a child reciting lines to an empty room. The frozen air carried rumors through the town like fire through dry hay. No one wanted to believe the boy could have acted alone. How could he drag bodies? How could he plan with such precision? Yet the pages told everything. Each act, each strike, each breath stolen. Written in his hand, with chilling clarity. The Kassel police did not yet know what they had found. To them, it was evidence. To history, it became a mystery. Why did he write plays instead of confessions? Why turn death into theater? Some believed he wanted control, to direct not just the murders, but how they would be remembered. Others believed it was his way of hiding from guilt, dressing crime in the costume of performance. Whatever the reason, the people of Kassel would never look at their theaters the same again. Candles flickered uneasily in playhouses. Actors stumbled over lines, afraid their words carried shadows. Children were hushed when they asked questions. Kassel had become a silent stage, and the boy its only performer. But the silence would not last. Hidden in the attic of the house was something the police almost missed. A small locked box, stuffed with scraps of paper. Fragments of unfinished plays. Notes, words scrawled in frenzy. Among them, one line repeated over and over, as if he wanted someone to find it. The curtain must fall, but not on me. The boy was gone. His family was dead, and the hunt for answers had just begun. The house in Kassel was not a home of warmth. Long before the murders, neighbors whispered about the heavy silence that clung to its walls. The shutters rarely opened. The father, stern and unyielding, was known for his strict discipline. The mother moved like a ghost, obedient and weary, always with her eyes lowered. And then there were the children, several of them, though only one would ever be remembered. The boy, the quiet one, the strange one. He did not play in the snow with the others. He did not sing in church. He lingered instead in corners, scribbling words on scraps of parchment, mouthing lines as though speaking to an invisible stage. Some claimed they heard him practicing dialogues, whispers drifting through the floorboards late at night. It was as if the boy lived in another world. A world made of shadows and plays, not flesh and love. Inside the home, the tension was constant. The father's footsteps were heavy, his voice always raised. He demanded obedience. He demanded silence. A single mistake, a spilled cup, a crooked button, could bring punishment swift and merciless. The mother rarely defended her children. She moved between her husband's storms like a candle trembling in wind. The boy, however, seemed untouched by fear. He would stare at his father with unnerving stillness, as though memorizing his rages for some secret script. Every punishment, every scream, every tear, all of it fed his imagination. In the attic, the boy built his sanctuary. A narrow wooden desk, a candle stub, pages hidden beneath loose floorboards. He called it his theater. He did not invite friends. He had none. Instead, he invited silence. And in that silence, he wrote. The words he wrote were not childish games. They were sharp, deliberate. Scenes of betrayal, fathers striking sons, mothers drowning in grief. Lines carried weight, as though spoken by actors on grand stages. How could a boy so young write like that? No one knew, but the plays grew darker with each passing season. One neighbor recalled that the boy once stood in the snow, eyes fixed on the distant theater hall of Kassel. He whispered, "They'll all watch one day." She dismissed it then as childish fantasy. But after the murders, her memory returned like a curse. When investigators searched the house after the killings, they noticed something unsettling. The placement of the bodies mirrored scenes described in his attic plays. The father slumped in a chair, just as the tyrant king had in the boy's scripts. The mother sprawled by the hearth, as if struck down by sorrow, exactly as written in another act. The boy had rehearsed their deaths long before he carried them out. This was not rage in a single moment. This was performance. The house itself seemed to carry the echo of it. Floorboards creaked where he once stood rehearsing. Candle wax stains marked his writing desk. Dusty drafts of tragedies scattered across the attic floor revealed his obsession. Each play more violent, each act more precise. One draft ended with a line that would haunt the townsfolk, "And the boy shall rise as the only survivor of his stage." To the people of Kassel, it was no longer just a crime. It was a curse. The house was sealed. Children crossed the street to avoid its shadow. Parents warned their sons never to dream too much, never to linger too long in imagination, because imagination in that house had turned deadly. But the story did not end there. Among the papers in his attic, one draft stood out. It was unfinished. The ink smudged. The handwriting rushed. It described a second act, one that stretched beyond the house. A stage that was not bound by walls, but by the whole of Kassel. It ended abruptly. No one knew what the boy had planned next. The first death was not loud. It was not messy. It was silent, precise, as though rehearsed countless times in the boy's mind. It began with his younger sister. She was frail, often sick, her cries filling the night when fevers returned. To the rest of the family, she was a burden. To the boy, she was an opening scene. One cold night, when the others slept, he crept into her small room. The candlelight flickered across her face as she stirred. In his hand, a cord, the script already written in his mind. He whispered a single line, words no one would ever hear, before pulling the cord tight. Her struggle was brief. When it was over, the boy placed her body gently back into the bed, as though she had fallen asleep. On her bedside table, he left a folded page. The first of his plays. Morning came, and the house carried on. The father grumbled at the table. The mother busied herself with chores. No one questioned why the girl did not rise. When they found her lifeless, they called it sickness. A fever, they said. God's will. But the boy knew. He watched as they prayed, as they wept, as they buried her beneath the frozen earth. He felt no grief, only the quiet thrill of control. His first act had been completed, and no one suspected him. That night, back in his attic, he wrote. His ink scratched furiously across the page. The play was short, only a single act, but each line captured her final moments. He gave her words she never spoke. He gave himself the power of the stage. And at the end of the script, he signed it, the author. Weeks passed before the second act. By then, the boy had grown bolder. He began to see the house not as a prison, but as a theater. His family were no longer relatives. They were characters waiting for their scenes. The second victim was his mother. To neighbors, she was a weary figure, bent by years of hardship. To him, she was the tragic queen. In his attic drafts, she wept over her children, cursed her husband, and begged for release. But in the real world, she did none of that. She stayed silent, always obeying. One winter evening, while she sat by the hearth, he made his move. No one heard the strike. No one saw her body collapse beside the fire. But when she was discovered, her position mirrored the scene he had written months before. Kneeling, arms outstretched, as if she had fallen mid-prayer. Another play was found at her side. Another act completed. By the time the father's turn came, suspicion should have stirred. But in Kassel, tragedy was often swallowed by faith. Sickness, weakness, even sudden death, all could be explained as God's will. The neighbors whispered, but no one looked closer. The boy, however, was not careless. He wanted more than death. He wanted art. His father's end would be the centerpiece. He waited until nightfall. The man had been drinking, his voice booming through the halls, his commands as sharp as ever. When he finally slumped into a chair, the boy stepped from the shadows. This time he did not rush. This was theater. He staged the death exactly as written. The father's body was found upright in his chair, his hand frozen around a cup, his head bowed, as if in silent defeat. And on the table before him, another play, this one longer, this one grander. By now, the house reeked of silence. Children gone, mother gone, father gone. Only the boy remained, slipping from room to room, setting scenes like a stagehand in a cursed theater. But it wasn't enough, because in his attic writings, there was always a next act, always another curtain to fall. And soon, Kassel itself would feel the weight of his unfinished script. By the time investigators pieced together the timeline, the horror had already taken on a theatrical shape. This was not a boy killing in rage. This was a playwright staging his masterpiece. Each murder was followed by a script. Each script mirrored the death in chilling detail. It was as though he lived two lives at once, the killer and the chronicler, the actor and the playwright. On the wooden table in the center of the house, 3 manuscripts lay stacked neatly. Titles written in a boy's uneven hand. The Sleeper's Exit, The Queen of Ashes, The Tyrant's Fall. Each play described not just the murder, but the emotions behind it. In the first, the younger sister was cast as a child who begged for freedom from suffering. In the second, the mother was a queen whose heart broke beneath the weight of obedience. In the third, the father was a fallen king, proud but doomed. The boy had rewritten his family's lives into roles. And in his plays, he gave them the voices they never used in life. The authorities were unsettled. These are not clumsy writings. The words carried rhythm, cadence, something disturbingly close to artistry. How could a boy so young compose such scenes? Some claimed he was gifted, a prodigy with language. Others swore he was possessed, his words too mature, too precise. But all agreed, the plays were not ordinary. They were drenched in blood and sorrow, yet written with a strange tenderness, almost as if the boy believed he was giving his family a gift. Immortality on the page. The people of Kassel, however, felt only dread. They began calling the house Das Bloodshed, the theater of blood. Parents told children never to go near it. Soldiers stationed nearby refused to patrol past it at night. Whispers spread that the boy still walked through its rooms, reciting lines, bowing to invisible crowds. And the plays themselves? They took on a cursed life of their own. Copies were made, hidden away in libraries and private collections. But no troupe dared to perform them. It was said that staging them would invite disaster, that each performance would end with death mirroring the script. One rumor told of a group of students who attempted to read The Queen of Ashes aloud in an abandoned chapel. Before the final lines were spoken, the roof beams groaned and collapsed, crushing one of them instantly. After that, no one dared test the curse again. Investigators, desperate for answers, turned the plays over to scholars. They searched for hidden codes, political meanings, even demonic invocations. Some found biblical references twisted into dark irony. Others found passages lifted from traveling German theater troops, reworked into something darker. But one phrase recurred in every play. At the very end, the author will remain. It was less a signature than a declaration. This unsettled the authorities most of all, because the boy himself was missing. No body, no footprints in the snow, no trail through the forest. He had vanished as if swallowed by the night. Some whispered he fled to another town. Others believed he had staged his own disappearance as the final act. And still, in the archives of Kassel, the scripts remained cold, ink-stained evidence that the blood spilled was never just murder. It was theater. The theater of blood had no audience. No applause. Only silence. But silence does not last forever. Because weeks after the house was sealed, new papers began appearing. Pages slipped beneath church doors. Manuscripts found abandoned on tavern tables. Each written in the same hand. The author was not finished. When the police gathered the scattered manuscripts, they expected confessions. But these were not confessions. They were performances carefully staged for an audience that did not exist. Each page was written as though meant to be read aloud. Stage directions, pauses, candlelight cues. The boy wasn't writing for his family. He wasn't writing for the police. He was writing for a crowd that would never come. The irony haunted the townsfolk. A child had killed, and yet he seemed obsessed, not with hiding, but with being seen. Still, there was no audience. No applause. No one to witness the theater he had built in blood. Perhaps that was why he kept writing, even after the murders. He scattered new pages across Kassel like invitations to a performance that would never be staged. One script appeared on the steps of a local theater, slipped beneath its locked doors. Another was left on a pew in the parish church, resting where the priest would find it. A third was discovered in the marketplace, hidden inside a loaf of bread as though he wanted common hands to touch his words. Each script bore the same final line. The curtain falls, yet I remain. The people of Kassel trembled. The boy was gone, but his words moved like a shadow through the town. The authorities tried to suppress the writings. They ordered the papers burned, but not all could be destroyed. Some officers, fascinated and horrified, kept copies for themselves. Scholars begged for access, believing the plays might unlock the boy's motives. But what terrified them most was not the murders themselves. It was the artistry. The boy seemed to understand something about grief, rage, and silence that even seasoned playwrights struggled to capture. His words were not childish scrawls. They carried weight. They carried truth. It was as if death had unlocked a brilliance that should not have existed in someone so young. Yet, for all the words, there was one absence. No witnesses, no spectators, no audience. The plays were written for a stage, but no stage ever held them. They were tragedies trapped on paper, waiting for eyes that never came. The boy seemed aware of this. In one surviving draft, he wrote, "An empty theater is the cruelest punishment. A story must be watched to live. Without an audience, even the author dies twice." But he hadn't died. At least, no body had been found, which left the people of Kassel asking, if the author remained, where was he watching from? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he lingered in the shadows of the local theater, slipping in during rehearsals, watching from the rafters. Others swore they saw a thin figure at the back of the church, mouthing words along with the priest's sermons. Children dared each other to whisper lines from his plays in the streets at night. Some claimed to hear faint footsteps behind them after doing so. The people became their own unwilling audience. Each whisper, each rumor, each frightened glance kept his theater alive. And perhaps that had been his plan all along. Years later, when the Kassel Theatre Files were locked away, one archivist made a chilling observation. "The plays were never written for us," he said. "They were written for him, to prove that even if no one clapped, no one watched, the author had still commanded a stage. His own stage, his own murders, his own silence. A theater of blood, an audience of none. Yet still, the author remained. Long after the murders, long after the shutters of the house had been nailed shut, neighbors swore the attic still breathed. They said on winter nights when the wind swept down from the hills, you could hear faint scratching, the sound of a quill across parchment. Some heard a boy's voice whispering lines into the dark, rehearsing words no one wanted to hear again. Others claimed to see a flicker of candlelight glowing through the attic cracks, though the house was abandoned. To the people of Kassel, the attic was no longer just wood and dust. It was a tomb of words, a stage that would not go dark. Before the police sealed the place, they found more than finished plays. They found fragments, half-finished drafts scattered beneath loose boards, pages filled with scribbled dialogue, lists of stage directions, notes in the margins, pause here, long silence, make them weep. The boy was not simply writing. He was directing a performance that existed only in his mind. And the attic had been his theater. Neighbors remembered strange things from before the killings. One woman recalled the boy standing at the attic window, staring down into the street, mouthing words silently as though speaking to invisible crowds. Another swore she once heard him laughing alone, a dry, theatrical laugh, cut short as if he realized someone was listening. At the time, they thought it odd, but harmless. Only later did they realize they had been hearing rehearsals. The attic had always been his stage, and his family his unwilling cast. After the house was abandoned, daring children crept inside, chasing stories of ghosts. They returned pale, trembling, unwilling to speak of what they saw. Some swore they heard pages rustling, though no wind blew. One boy claimed he saw words carved into the wooden beams. The play is never over. That child never spoke again of the attic. He refused to walk past the house for the rest of his life. Even years later, when the Kassel Theatre Files were quietly buried in archives, the stories of the attic remained. Visitors to Kassel would hear them in hushed tavern whispers, that if you pressed your ear against the boarded windows at night, you could hear the final line repeated over and over in a boy's whisper. The author will remain. The attic was empty. The boy was gone. But the whispers refused to die. One archivist who studied the plays made a chilling discovery. In the unfinished drafts, the boy had outlined something larger, a second act that reached beyond the family. In his notes, he described an audience greater than blood, a performance staged not for his house, not for his town, but for Prussia itself. But the pages ended abruptly, as though torn away. No one ever found the rest of the script. And so the attic became a symbol. To some, it was a warning of what silence and cruelty could create inside a child. To others, it was a haunting reminder that imagination, when fed only shadows, can turn deadly. Yet to Kassel, it was something worse. It was unfinished. The whispers never stopped. The pages were never complete. And every time the wind moaned through the attic beams, the townspeople shivered, wondering if the boy was still writing somewhere. Somewhere unseen, somewhere unheard, waiting for the curtain to rise again. When the murders shook Kassel, the townspeople turned to the church for answers. Surely God's house could explain what no one else could. But what the parish priest revealed only deepened the darkness. In the weeks before the killings, the boy had visited the church often. He did not attend services. He slipped inside when the pews were empty, sitting silently in the back. Sometimes he lit candles, watching the flames as if studying their movements. Other times he wandered the aisles, fingers brushing against the hymn books, whispering words too faint to hear. The priest noticed. At first, he thought it loneliness. Many children sought solace in the church. But then came the confessions. The boy entered the confessional booth quietly, as though afraid to disturb the air. His voice was soft but steady. He did not speak of stolen bread or disobedience, the sins most children his age admitted. Instead, he spoke of theater. He told the priest he was writing plays where people died, but not from sickness or age, from deliberate acts. He described scenes of strangulation, of poison, of blades, always with precision, always with detail. The priest grew uneasy. He asked if these were only fantasies, stories inspired by wandering troops. The boy replied with words that chilled him. "Father, The stage must be real. The curtain cannot fall without blood. The priest hesitated. He wanted to dismiss it as imagination. But something in the boy's tone felt different. There was no laughter, no mischief. Only certainty. Weeks later, after the bodies were found, the priest confessed his guilt to fellow clergymen. He had not reported the boy's words. He had told himself it was harmless. Now, he believed he had heard a warning, a rehearsal whispered through the confessional screen. His torment deepened when the police showed him the plays. In several scripts, biblical verses appeared twisted into chilling lines. Psalms rewritten as curses. Sermon fragments reshaped into death speeches. Words the boy could only have learned in church. The priest realized with horror that the boy had been rehearsing even there, inside sacred walls. The parish records reveal one final entry from the priest, written in his own trembling hand. He came to me again, the night before the murders. He asked if sins written down can be forgiven, even if they are not yet done. I told him God judges the heart, not the ink. He smiled, a smile I cannot forget, and said, "Then I will make my heart the stage." The priest carried that memory until his death. Some say he never forgave himself. Others whispered he went mad, convinced the boy's spirit lingered in the church, still reciting plays to unseen angels. The church itself bore scars of the ordeal. Parishioners refused to sit in the pew where the boy had whispered. The confessional booth was dismantled and burned, as though fire could cleanse it. And every Good Friday, when the church bells tolled, old residents swore they could hear a child's voice echoing faintly through the nave, reciting words only half remembered. The priest's confession was buried with the Kassel Theatre Files, but it left a chilling legacy. The boy had not only rehearsed in his attic, he had rehearsed in God's house. And perhaps that was his greatest crime of all. When word of the murder spread, Kassel's local guard was quickly overwhelmed. They had no training for something like this. A family slaughtered by a child who then vanished without a trace. It was not long before the Prussian secret police were summoned. They arrived in silence, their carriages rolling into town under the cloak of fog. They wore plain coats, spoke little, and kept their eyes sharp. To the townspeople, their presence was both a comfort and a terror. Comfort because they promised answers. Terror because everyone knew what the secret police did to those they suspected. The house was sealed tighter. Guards stood watch at the doors. Papers, plays, and every scrap of writing were collected and stored in iron chests. The officers scoured the attic, the cellar, even the chimney, as though expecting to find the boy folded into the shadows. But he was gone. The investigation became obsession. The secret police read each play with the seriousness of a manifesto. They believed the boy's writings might reveal a greater threat. Not just madness, but rebellion. Every line was studied for hidden meaning. Was the tyrant's fall a coded attack on the Prussian king? Was the Queen of Ashes a veiled critique of the church? The more they read, the less certain they became. The words were soaked in blood and sorrow, but they were not political. They were personal, too personal. Yet the officers feared something deeper. If a child could write with such venom, could others? Could words spread like disease? Could theater itself become dangerous? The town lived in dread as interrogations began. Neighbors were questioned for hours. Teachers, priests, merchants, all asked if they had noticed strange behavior. Some admitted they had seen the boy scribbling notes, muttering lines, staring too long at the theater hall. But no one had thought it criminal. The police kept pressing. Who taught him to write? Who gave him plays? Who whispered these ideas into his head? But no one had answers. One officer wrote in his report, "We are not hunting a boy. We are hunting a shadow. He does not eat. He does not sleep. He does not leave footprints. He leaves only words. Words sharper than knives." Still, they scoured Kassel and beyond. Forest paths, riverbanks, and along the trade roads. But the boy had vanished as if he had stepped off the stage and out of the world. The most chilling discovery came weeks later, when a sealed envelope appeared at the local guardhouse. No one knew who delivered it. Inside was a single page, written in the same unmistakable hand. It read, You search for me as if I am flesh. I am not. I am script. I am scene. I am silence waiting for sound. Look not for me in the world, for I live in the play. The author will remain. The police doubled their efforts, but morale crumbled. How do you capture someone who claims he no longer exists as a person, but as a story? Eventually, the order came from Berlin. Lock the files. Seal the house. Stop the whispers before they spread. And so the case was buried. The boy was never found. The Kassel Theatre Files vanished into archives, stamped with warnings, for internal use only. Do not circulate. But the people of Kassel never forgot the sight of those officers in the fog, searching not for a criminal, but for a ghost written in ink. The murders might have been contained within Kassel, buried beneath silence and snow, if not for the whispers that traveled faster than any official report. News spread first through merchants, a butcher speaking in hushed tones to a trader, a cobbler retelling fragments to a soldier. By spring, the story had left Kassel and was crawling across Prussia like a dark fog. But with distance came distortion. In one town, they said the boy had killed a dozen people, not just his family. In another, they whispered he had been raised by actors who taught him death as theater. In Berlin, the tale grew larger still. A demon child who wrote plays in blood, summoning spirits with every performance. The truth was twisted, but the fascination was real. Theaters across Prussia began to feel the weight of suspicion. Every tragedy performed on stage carried whispers of the author of Kassel. Actors grew uneasy delivering death scenes. Audiences shifted uncomfortably in their seats, fearful the curtain might hide more than performance. In some towns, plays were banned entirely. Officials declared theater itself a breeding ground for unrest. Parish priests warned from the pulpit that words could wound as sharply as steel, and that the devil had already claimed the stage in Kassel. The boy had never performed his plays, yet he had managed to poison the art of theater itself. Rumors soon reached Vienna, then Paris. Intellectuals debated the meaning of the Kassel Theatre Files. Was the boy a genius, born too dark for his age? Or was he simply a mad child, his words mistaken for brilliance? Some believed the plays should be published to reveal the depths of his sickness. Others demanded they remain hidden, fearful they might inspire imitation. In secret circles, copies circulated anyway. Smuggled manuscripts were read by candlelight in drawing rooms, where nobles shivered at their sharpness. A handful of playwrights even borrowed lines, slipping fragments of the author's words into their own works. The Kassel boy's voice, though silenced in life, was whispering in his stages he never saw. But for the people of Kassel, fame brought no comfort. Their town was now a ghost story. Travelers came not for trade, but for curiosity, to walk past the shuttered house and claim they felt the presence of the author. Children were warned never to linger near it, lest they hear whispers pulling them into his unfinished script. And the townsfolk lived with shame. They asked themselves, had they failed to see? Had they ignored the warning signs? Some remembered his distant stare, his whispered rehearsals, the way he scribbled furiously in solitude. They replayed those memories until they burned, convinced they might have stopped him. But guilt is a heavy burden, and silence easier than confession. By 1810, the Kassel Theatre Files were locked in a Berlin archive. Officials declared the case closed, though no body had ever been found. Yet even sealed away, the plays still moved. A scholar studying them wrote, "They are not scripts alone. They are wounds stitched into paper. Each line bleeds. Each stage direction cries. They are not meant for the stage. They are meant for eternity." The boy had won an audience. Against all odds, he had won now. Across Prussia, across Europe, his story lived. But the author himself remained missing. By the mid-19th century, the Kassel Theatre Files had already slipped into legend. The official records sat locked in Berlin, gathering dust. But among storytellers, scholars, and frightened children, the boy was still alive. The unanswered question, what became of him, refused to fade. Some believed he drowned in the Fulda River during his escape, his body carried away by the current. Others insisted he joined a troupe of traveling actors, hiding in plain sight, reciting lines that were his own. A darker rumor claimed he had been taken by the secret police, hidden in an asylum, his words stolen and studied in secret. But the most chilling belief was simpler, that he never left at all, that he remained in Kassel, unseen, waiting for the right moment to write again. The last official sighting came from a shepherd on the outskirts of town. He claimed he saw a boy in tattered clothes wandering the fields at dusk, clutching a bundle of papers. When the shepherd called out, the boy turned, smiled faintly, and vanished into the tree lane. The papers, he swore, fluttered like wings in the dying light. The authorities dismissed it, but the story stayed. Over the years, strange events kept the legend alive. In 1837, a theater in Leipzig collapsed mid-performance. Survivors whispered they had seen a young man in the balcony, mouthing the actor's lines just moments before the disaster. In 1852, a priest in Munich claimed a bundle of anonymous scripts was left at his altar, written in the same sharp hand as the boy from Kassel. And in Kassel itself, townsfolk spoke of voices in the night, of a candle flickering in the attic of the boarded-up house, of words scratched into frost on window panes. The author will remain. By the century's end, the boy had become both myth and warning. Parents told his story to frighten children into obedience. Scholars whispered about him as a lost genius. Actors avoided even speaking his name, fearing the curse of unfinished plays. But inside the Berlin archives, the Kassel Theatre Files lay untouched. Pages yellowed, ink fading, but words still sharp. Archivists reported an unease when handling them, as though the lines themselves were watching. One wrote in the margins of his catalog, "The scripts do not rest. They breathe." And so the story closed, not with answers, but with silence. No body was ever found. No finales cryptic. Only plays that ended with the same chilling declaration: the curtain falls. The author will remain. To this day, no one knows if the boy died in the winter of 1803, or if somewhere, in shadowed halls and forgotten attics, he still writes, still waits, for an audience that may never come. The Theater of Blood. The House of Shadows. The audience of none. The final curtain never truly fell.